The weight of the room was a physical thing, a pressure compounded by 1,000 carats of diamonds, and the collective scent of fortunes measured in the billions. Crystal chandeliers, vast and intricate as frozen galaxies, dripped light onto the sea of black ties and silk gowns. This was the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, rented for the night to host the Architectural Guild's annual Humanitarian Awards. It was a gilded cage, and Ilara Vance knew, with a certainty that chilled the champagne in her hand, that the door had just been locked from the outside. She was the evening's main event. At 38, Ilara was the principal of Vance Atelier, a firm celebrated not for its ostentatious skyscrapers, but for its philosophy that architecture was a social contract. Her project's low-income housing that felt like luxury, public libraries that breathed with natural light, urban parks that reclaimed industrial scars had reshaped skylines and communities. The award she was about to receive was for the Phoenix Project, a revolutionary sustainable community built for families displaced by climate-related disasters. It was the culmination of her life's work, a testament to the belief she had inherited from her father that a well-designed space could restore dignity. The presenter, a stooped and venerable architectural critic, finished his glowing introduction, a visionary whose blueprints are drawn with both ink and empathy. It is my profound honor to present the Humanitarian of the Year award to Ms. Ilara Vance. A wave of polite, resonant applause washed over her. Ilara placed her napkin on the table, her movements economical and precise, like the lines in her designs. She felt the familiar gaze of her mentor, Arthur Graves. From a nearby table, a look of paternal pride. She offered him a small, controlled smile and began her walk to the stage, a path that suddenly felt miles long. The applause was a steady, rhythmic current carrying her forward. Then, a subtle shift in the room's energy. A man was rising from the center table, a table reserved for the event's most significant patrons. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom tuxedo, with silver hair that caught the light like spun moonlight, and a face that was a study in handsome, benevolent authority. This was Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne was not an architect. He was something far more powerful. He was a philanthropist, a titan of private equity, whose charitable foundation was so vast, its influence so pervasive, that he was often described as a secular saint. His name was carved into the marble facades of hospitals, universities, and, ironically, the very museum in which they now stood. When Julian Thorne stood, conversations did not just stop, they held their breath. He approached the stage, intercepting the presenter with a disarming smile and a hand raised in a gesture of humble interruption. "Forgive me," he said. His voice, a rich, perfectly modulated baritone that carried through the ballroom without the aid of a microphone. The sound engineers, flustered, scrambled to adjust. "I hope you'll indulge an old patron for a moment. I feel compelled to add an unscheduled, personal tribute." The presenter, starstruck and flustered, could only nod and step aside. Julian took the microphone, his movements fluid and confident. The applause, which had begun to fade, swelled again, this time with more fervor. He was a beloved public figure, a man whose generosity seemed boundless. Ilara stopped at the foot of the stage steps, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of polite neutrality. She was an architect. She understood the importance of a facade. Inside, a cold, sharp dread was coiling in her stomach. She had never met Julian Thorne, but she knew of him. Everyone did. Their paths had never crossed, and she could think of no reason for him to single her out. "Ilara Vance," Julian began, his eyes finding hers across the space. The warmth in his gaze did not reach them. It was a stage light, bright and artificial, A name synonymous with innovation, with hope. We are here tonight to celebrate her work. And rightly so. She builds homes for the displaced, shelters for the forgotten. She builds from the ashes. He let the words hang in the air. The audience leaned in, captivated. There was a subtle emphasis on the word ashes that felt wrong. A piece of grit in a perfectly calibrated machine. It is a truly admirable quality, Julian continued, his smile never faltering. To possess the kind of resilience required to build anew when a foundation has been utterly destroyed. Not everyone has that strength. Some families, when faced with public ruin, with the complete collapse of a legacy, they simply crumble. They are wiped from the ledger of history, their names remembered only in whispers of scandal and failure. A murmur rippled through the audience. The language was becoming strangely specific, coded. It was no longer a tribute. It was a dissection. Ilara felt hundreds of eyes on her, their curiosity pricking at her skin. Arthur's proud smile had vanished, replaced by a look of deep confusion. She remained motionless, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She did not allow a single flicker of emotion to cross her face. She was assessing him. This man who had commandeered her moment of triumph to deliver a veiled sermon on ruin. Her father, Robert Vance, was also a builder, Julian said. And at the mention of her father's name, the dread in Ilara's stomach turned to ice. Her father had been dead for 20 years. He was a man of principle. I'm told, a man who believed in the unshakable integrity of a structure. And yet, he found himself involved in a business affair. Years ago. That ended in utter devastation. A tragedy that saw a great name, a name as respected then, as Vance is today, reduced to dust. A heartbreaking story of betrayal and financial collapse. He was talking about the Sterling Thorne scandal of 1998. Ilara was only a teenager when it happened. Her father, a structural engineer, had been a key witness. He had discovered fatal flaws in the financial and ethical framework of a massive corporate merger and had been legally compelled to testify. His testimony had brought down a titan, a man named Alistair Thorne, Julian's father. The audience was now deeply uncomfortable. This was no tribute. It was a public reckoning, an act of psychological warfare conducted with a surgeon's precision. Julian was not just discrediting her. He was exhuming the most traumatic event of her family's past and laying it bare on the biggest stage of her professional life. He was reframing her father not as a hero who told the truth, but as an agent of another family's destruction. So when we honor Ilara Vance tonight, Julian concluded, his voice softening into a tone of feigned sympathy, let us not only celebrate the beautiful structures she erects, let us also remember the ruins upon which they are built, for it is a powerful reminder that for every great success story, there is often an equally great and forgotten story of failure. He set the microphone back in its stand and began to applaud. A slow, deliberate clap. His expression was one of profound sincerity, the look of a man who believed he had just delivered a deep and necessary truth. The confused audience, taking their cue from him, joined in, though the applause was now hesitant, uncertain. They were applauding her family's pain. Ilara felt the world tilt, the glittering chandeliers blurring into streaks of light. But her training, her discipline, the years spent mastering the unforgiving physics of steel and concrete, held her steady. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of expensive perfume and malice. Then she walked up the steps to the stage. She took the heavy crystal award from the bewildered presenter. She stepped to the microphone, the warmth of Julian's hand still lingering on its surface. The ballroom was utterly silent. Every person in the room was waiting to see her break. They expected tears, a flustered defense, perhaps a hurried and undignified exit. Alara looked out over the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping past them until it landed, with unwavering stillness, on Julian Thorne. He was watching her, his head tilted slightly, a placid, almost curious expression on his face. She leaned toward the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear and cold, and carried to every corner of the room. It was the sound of polished marble. "Thank you," she said. That was all. She held his gaze for one beat longer, a silent declaration that he had not broken her. He had merely declared war. Then, with the award held firmly in her hand, she turned and walked off the stage, her composure not a shield of passivity, but the first chilling glimpse of a formidable opponent assessing her enemy. The battle had begun. The drive back to her apartment was a blur of streetlights bleeding across the rain-slicked glass of the town car. The Crystal Award sat on the seat beside her, cold and inert, its sharp edges glinting in the passing traffic. Back in her penthouse, a minimalist sanctuary of concrete, glass, and steel overlooking the city, the oppressive weight of the gala's atmosphere finally lifted, replaced by a sterile tension that was just as suffocating. The silence of the space, usually a comfort, was now louder than the confused whispers that had followed her out of the museum. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since she'd left, but she ignored it. She knew what the messages would say, expressions of concern from friends, confusion from colleagues, and a single, frantic text from her mentor. "Arthur, Alara, call me. We need to talk about what that was." She wasn't ready to talk. She was still processing, analyzing, fitting Julian Thorne's public performance into a logical framework. An architect does not see a building. She sees the forces acting upon it: tension, compression, load-bearing walls, and points of potential failure. Julian Thorne's speech had been an act of deliberate structural sabotage, designed to undermine her foundation in the most public way possible. But why? It was more than a petty slight. The precision of it, the calculated cruelty, it was the opening move in a much larger game. She poured a glass of water, her hand steady, and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below, a glittering schematic of light and shadow. She had helped shape that skyline. Her buildings were out there, physical manifestations of her belief in order, function, and grace. Thorne had attacked not her work, but the moral authority from which it sprang, by tarnishing the memory of her father. He had called her father a man of principle, then immediately framed that principle as the cause of another's ruin. He had used the language of praise to inflict a wound. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He hadn't lied. Not technically. He had simply rearranged the truth until it told a story of his own design. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. The subject line stark and impersonal. Project Update, Westfield Tower. It was from the primary investment group behind her most ambitious project to date. A mixed-use skyscraper that was set to be the new gold standard in sustainable urban design. Her heart tightened. This was it. The other shoe. She opened the email. It was a curt, legally sanitized message from a junior partner at the firm, Ms. Vance. "In light of certain reputational concerns that have been brought to our attention this evening, the board has scheduled an emergency review of our commitment to the Westfield project. We will require a full audit of all structural and financial projections to be delivered within 48 hours. A formal meeting is scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. Reputational concerns brought to their attention this evening." The timing was no coincidence. Julian's speech was not just a personal attack. It was the first volley in a corporate assault. He hadn't just humiliated her. He had poisoned the well. He was manufacturing a crisis of confidence among her backers. This was how power worked in their world. It wasn't waged with fists, but with whispers. A word in the right ear. A well-timed doubt planted in a boardroom. A public performance of concern that was actually a declaration of intent. Julian Thorne didn't need to raise his voice. The deference he commanded was so absolute that a mere suggestion from him carried the weight of a royal decree. Conversation stopped when he entered a room not out of fear, but out of a profound respect that he had meticulously cultivated over decades. That respect was now his most potent weapon against her. Finally, she answered the call from Arthur Graves. He was 75, a lion of the architectural world who had taken her under his wing when she was fresh out of graduate school. His voice was strained with a mixture of fury and anxiety. "Alara, are you all right? What in God's name was that? I've never seen anything so vicious." "I'm fine, Arthur," she replied, her voice even. It was a performance. A performance. It was a character assassination. He dragged your father's name through the mud. Robert was a hero for what he did. He stood up to a corrupt monster and told the truth. "Julian Thorne does not see it that way," Alara said, the pieces clicking into place. "He sees a son avenging his father." "This is insane," Arthur sputtered. "Alistair Thorne was a crook who destroyed thousands of lives. His suicide was a tragedy of his own making. Julian has spent 30 years building a saintly reputation on the ashes of his father's disgrace. Why would he risk it all now to attack you?" "Because he's not risking anything," Alara said, a cold clarity settling over her. "He's testing the waters. He did it in a room full of people who depend on his goodwill, his donations. He knew no one would challenge him. He was demonstrating his power." As if on cue, another call came through. It was from a number she didn't recognize. She put Arthur on hold. "This is Alara Vance." "Ms. Vance." A smooth, unctuous voice replied. "My name is Marcus Cole. I'm an associate of Mr. Thorne. He asked me to reach out personally to express his hope that his tribute this evening wasn't misinterpreted." The audacity was breathtaking. "Misinterpreted," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Indeed, Julian has the deepest admiration for your work. He simply believes that history, in all its complexity, should be acknowledged. It's so admirable, really, how you've managed to build something so positive from the ashes of your family's misfortune." It was the same phrase from the speech, ashes, and the same veiled insult, wrapped in the language of a compliment. This was not an apology. It was a confirmation. "What does Mr. Thorne want?" Mr. Cole asked, cutting through the pretense. There was a brief pause. Cole's tone shifted, losing its synthetic warmth and taking on a sharper, transactional edge. "Mr. Thorne has a keen interest in a number of properties currently under development by Vance Atelier. He believes that, under the stewardship of the Thorne Foundation, these projects could be accelerated. He would be prepared to make a generous offer to acquire your firm's portfolio, allowing you to step away from the pressures of leadership and focus on your purely creative endeavors. It would be a graceful exit, given the circumstances." There it was, the inciting incident. The gala was the preamble. This was the declaration. This was a hostile takeover disguised as a rescue mission. He was going to manufacture a crisis, tank her company's value, and then sweep in to buy the pieces for pennies on the dollar. "The circumstances being the ones he created an hour ago?" Alara asked, her voice laced with ice. Cole chuckled softly. A dry, rustling sound. Ms. Vance. Julian Thorne doesn't create circumstances. He merely illuminates them. The instability of your family's legacy. That has always been a matter of public record. He simply brought it back into the light. I will have his formal offer sent over in the morning. I do hope you'll consider it seriously. It would be a shame for a firm with so much promise to crumble under a crisis of confidence. The line went dead. Ilara switched back to Arthur's call. "Arthur," she said, her voice now hard as granite. "Julian Thorne is trying to buy my company." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Buy you out?" "After that display. That's not a business proposition. Ilara, that's a threat." "I know," she said, staring out at the city that was her canvas, her battlefield. Thorne thought he was dismantling her creation. He didn't understand. An architect knows that before you can build. You must first have a blueprint. Her mind was already working, sketching out the lines of a counteroffensive. He thought her composure at the gala was weakness, a sign of shock. He was wrong. It was the calm of a strategist observing the enemy's opening move. He had shown her his method's public humiliation, reputational assault, the weaponization of a shared, tragic past. "What are you going to do?" Arthur asked, his voice heavy with worry. "I'm going to prepare for a meeting," Ilara replied. "He wants to talk about foundations. I'm going to show him what happens when he tries to shatter one made of solid rock." She would not be undone by whispers and innuendo. Julian Thorne had started this war. She would finish it. Ilara's first move was to fight the way she had always fought, with facts, integrity, and the unshakable belief that the truth was its own defense. It was a strategy that had served her well in a world of zoning boards and engineering challenges. She quickly discovered it was useless in a war against a ghost. She spent the weekend in a state of controlled fury, working with her small, fiercely loyal executive team to assemble the audit for the Westfield investors. They compiled every structural diagram, every financial projection, every environmental impact report. The resulting dossier was over 1,000 pages long, a monument to due diligence. It proved, beyond any doubt, that the Westfield Tower was not only sound, but was poised to be one of the most successful and groundbreaking projects the city had seen in decades. On Monday morning, she walked into the boardroom of the investment firm, a sleek, sterile space high above Park Avenue. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and unspoken conclusions. The board members, men and women she had known and worked with for years, refused to meet her eye. Their faces were masks of professional regret. She laid out her case with her usual cool precision, walking them through the data, her arguments as clean and unassailable as the lines of her buildings. She explained that the reputational concerns were the result of a calculated personal attack by Julian Thorne, rooted in a decades-old family tragedy. When she finished, there was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, the chairman, a man named Peterson, who had once called her a genius, cleared his throat. "Ilara, this is thorough," he said, gesturing vaguely at the mountain of documents. "But you must understand our position. Our fiduciary duty is to our stakeholders. An architect's reputation is the bedrock of a project like this. If that bedrock is perceived to be unstable." Perceived, Ilara interjected, her control fraying for the first time. "There is no instability. There is only slander." The Thorne Foundation is the single largest charitable donor in this city. Another board member said flatly, "Julian Thorne sits on the board of this bank. He sits on the board of the university my son attends. His word carries weight." The message was clear. The facts didn't matter. The truth didn't matter. All that mattered was Julian Thorne's influence. A vast, invisible web that ensnared them all. They weren't just investors. They were subjects in his kingdom. "We're putting the Westfield project on indefinite hold," Peterson concluded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll need to conduct our own third-party review. It could take months." Months she didn't have. A hold was a death sentence. It would trigger penalty clauses with contractors, spook other investors, and bleed her company dry. She walked out of the boardroom feeling as if she had been hollowed out, the structural supports of her career methodically removed. Her next call was to a top-tier public relations firm, a crisis management team known for handling corporate warfare. She met with the senior partner, a sharp, cynical woman named Isabel, who listened to the story with a detached, clinical interest. "It's a classic ghost campaign," Isabel said, leaning back in her chair. "Thorne doesn't have to prove anything. He just has to create the smoke. The media will imagine the fire. He's untouchable, a public saint. Any attempt to attack him directly will make you look vindictive and unhinged. So I do nothing. I let him destroy my father's name and my life's work." "I would advise you to accept his offer," Isabel said coolly. "Cut your losses. Take the money and start over somewhere else. You can't fight a man who owns the narrative." The legal route was an even faster dead end. Her corporate lawyer, a man who had been with her since she founded the atelier, met her for coffee, his face grim. "We can't sue for slander," he explained. "Thorne was too clever. He never made a direct accusation. He used implication, innuendo. It's all protected speech. And frankly, Ilara, no judge in this state wants to be the one who takes on Julian Thorne. It would be career suicide." Every door was closing. Every conventional weapon in her arsenal was useless. Julian's influence was not just deep, it was atmospheric. It was the air these people breathed. To fight him was to fight the system itself. Her final hope was Arthur Graves. He had mentored her, championed her, and stood by her at every turn. He was old school, a man of unimpeachable integrity, connected to every pillar of the city's establishment. If anyone could rally support, it was him. She met him at his club, a hushed, wood-paneled institution where deals had been brokered for over a century. He looked older than he had just days before, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. "I've made some calls. Ilara," he began, his voice low. "Spoken to people, old friends. No one will touch this. They're all terrified of him. Terrified of a philanthropist. They're terrified of his power," Arthur corrected gently. "The grants he can withhold, the boards he can resign from, the social ruin he can orchestrate with a single phone call. He's built an empire of goodwill, and he's weaponizing it." He took a sip of his scotch, the ice clinking against the glass. "He called me. You know." Ilara felt a fresh wave of cold. "Thorne called you?" "Yesterday. It was a friendly chat. He spoke of his great admiration for my career. He mentioned the new wing of the university's architecture school, the one I've been fundraising for. The Thorne Foundation," he said, "was considering a significant endowment, a legacy gift, the Arthur Graves Pavilion, he called it." The threat was unspoken, but perfectly clear. Fall in line, or your legacy dies with you. "What did you say to him?" Ilara asked, though she already knew the answer. Arthur looked down at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. "Ilara, you are like a daughter to me. I believe in you. I believe in your work. But this man, he is not a businessman. He is a force of nature. He operates on a different level. You can't fight a god." The words hung in the air between them, an epitaph for her hope. "He told me to tell you to take the deal," Arthur continued, his voice barely a whisper. "He said it was the only way to preserve what you've built, that a strategic retreat is not a surrender." It was the ultimate betrayal, not of loyalty, but of faith. The one man she believed would stand with her, the one who had taught her to fight for her principles, was telling her to lay down her arms. She was utterly, completely alone. She stood up, her chair scraping softly against the polished floor. The disappointment she felt was a clean, sharp pain, more clarifying than anger. "Thank you for the drink, Arthur," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "and for the advice." She walked out of the club and into the harsh afternoon light. The failure was total. The conventional methods, truth, law, public relations, loyalty had all crumbled. She had tried to fight with honor against an enemy who had none. It was in that moment of absolute isolation, standing on the steps of a club built by men who wrote the rules of power, that Alara Vance made a decision. Her mentor was wrong. You could fight a god. You just couldn't do it with prayers. You had to dismantle his temple, stone by stone. You had to desecrate his altars. You had to become a force of nature yourself. If Julian Thorne wanted to wage a war of whispers and shadows, then she would learn to live in the dark. She would adopt his ruthless tactics, not for revenge, but for survival. She went back to her apartment, the architect's sanctuary, and began to draw a new set of blueprints. Not for a building, but for the systematic deconstruction of an empire. Ilara cleared her accounts, liquidating personal assets and consolidating her capital into a single, untraceable fund. The Thorne acquisition offer sat on her desk, a multi-million-dollar surrender she used as a paperweight. She was no longer Alara Vance, celebrated architect. She was the commander of a guerrilla war with a war chest of one. She needed an army. Her first recruit was a man who had already been destroyed by the kind of power she was up against. His name was Leo Sterling, a former investigative journalist for the New York Times. Leo had been a star, a Pulitzer finalist with a reputation for taking down corrupt politicians and corporate malfeasance. 6 years ago, he had published an exposé on a powerful tech billionaire. The billionaire retaliated, not with a lawsuit, but with a silent, brutal campaign. He bought the debt of the newspaper Leo worked for, had him fired, and then used a network of online trolls and paid media hacks to systematically shred his reputation. Now, Leo ran a niche, subscriber-only blog from a cramped apartment in Queens, writing brilliant, unread pieces about the hidden levers of power. He was a ghost, hungry for redemption. Alara found him in a dimly lit coffee shop, hunched over a laptop, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. He looked older than his 45 years, his eyes etched with the weariness of a man who had seen the truth and been punished for it. "Mr. Sterling," she said, sitting opposite him, "my name is Alara Vance. I read your piece on how private foundations are used as vehicles for influence peddling. It was brilliant." Leo looked up, his eyes sharp and suspicious. "You and my 12 other subscribers. What do you want?" "Ms. Vance, I saw what Thorne did to you at the gala. If you're here for a quote, my rate is 0, and my opinion is that you're already finished." "I'm not here for a quote," Alara said, her voice low and steady. "I'm here to offer you a job. I'm going to take Julian Thorne apart, piece by piece. I need someone who understands how to find the rot underneath the polished facade. I need someone who isn't afraid of him. And I need someone who has nothing left to lose." Leo stared at her for a long moment, a flicker of the old fire returning to his eyes. He had been in the wilderness for years. She was offering him a way back, a chance to hunt the biggest predator of them all. What's the catch? The catch is that we will be operating completely outside the system, she said. No bylines, no glory. If we get caught, we will be disavowed and destroyed. If we win, no one will ever know we fought. He closed his laptop. When do we start? The second member of her team was a ghost of a different kind. Anya Sharma was a legend in the gray hat hacking community, known only by her handle, Daedalus. She was a cybersecurity prodigy who, at 19, had single-handedly exposed a massive data mining operation run by a social media giant. Instead of being celebrated, she was threatened with federal prosecution and forced into a plea deal that barred her from working in the tech industry for 10 years. She now made a living doing freelance penetration testing for small companies, her brilliant mind shackled by a legal system that feared her. Alara found her through a series of encrypted channels, following a digital breadcrumb trail left by Leo. Their first meeting was a video call. Anya's face obscured by a pixelated filter, her voice a synthesized monotone. I don't do corporate espionage, the voice said. I'm not asking you to, Ilara replied. Julian Thorne presents himself to the world as a transparent, benevolent entity. I believe that's a lie. I need you to find the proof. His foundation processes billions of dollars in donations and grants. His private equity firm has a global portfolio. Somewhere in that mountain of data, there are cracks. I need you to find them. Why should I trust you? Anya's synthesized voice asked. Because the same system that crushed you is protecting him. Ilara said simply. They use the law to break you for telling the truth. He uses the law as a shield to hide his... This isn't about money. It's about balance. There was a long silence. Then the filter on the video feed dissolved, revealing the face of a young woman in her late 20s, with intelligent, intense eyes and a cynical twist to her mouth. Thorne's digital security is state-of-the-art, Anya said, her real voice crisp and direct. This won't be easy. The most challenging structures are the most rewarding to build, Alara replied, and, I imagine, to dismantle. Anya smiled for the first time. A small, sharp grin. Send me the preliminary data package. I'll do a threat analysis. Their headquarters was a rented, anonymous office space in a nondescript building downtown. Paid for in cash. The windows were blacked out. The walls were covered in whiteboards, soon to be filled with corporate structures, flowcharts, and timelines. Anya built them a closed-loop network, completely air-gapped from the outside world. They were a ghost cell, operating in the heart of the city, invisible to the enemy that surrounded them. Their war began, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of keyboard keys and the rustle of paper. Leo, using his old-school journalistic skills, started digging into the public record, building a comprehensive history of the Thorne Empire. He spent weeks in dusty archives, poring over decades-old property deeds, tax filings, and court records. He was looking for patterns, for anomalies, for the loose thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. Meanwhile, Anya began her digital assault. It was a delicate, patient process. She didn't try to brute force her way through Thorne's formidable firewalls. Instead, she engaged in sophisticated social engineering. She created fake online profiles, cultivating digital friendships with junior employees at Thorne's Foundation. She sent carefully crafted phishing emails, not to steal passwords, but to map the internal network architecture. She was a phantom, moving through the periphery of his digital world, learning its language, its rhythms, its vulnerabilities. Alara was the strategist, the architect of the campaign. She took the fragments of data that Leo and Anya unearthed and began to assemble them into a coherent blueprint of Thorne's operations. She saw things the others didn't. As an architect, she understood that every complex system, whether a building or an empire, has critical load-bearing points. Find them, and you can bring the whole thing down. Their first breakthrough was small, almost insignificant. Leo discovered a shell corporation registered in Delaware, owned by the Thorne Foundation. On the surface, it was a holding company for a portfolio of commercial real estate. But its tax filings showed a series of unusual transactions: small, regular payments to a consulting firm in the Cayman Islands. "It's a classic money laundering setup," Leo said, pointing to the figures on the whiteboard. "But the amounts are tiny. A few $100,000 a year. For a man like Thorne, that's pocket change. It's not about greed. It's for something else." Anya took the name of the Caymanian firm and began her deep dive. It took her 3 days of relentless, intricate work, but she finally broke through their lax security. The firm wasn't a consultancy, it was a ghost. Its only function was to pay a monthly retainer to a single individual, a retired zoning commissioner in New Jersey. "Bingo," Alara whispered. She cross-referenced the commissioner's tenure with Thorne's development history. 5 years ago, the Thorne Foundation had proposed a massive new headquarters, a gleaming tower that required a controversial zoning variance. The variance had been approved in a surprise, last-minute vote, spearheaded by this very commissioner. It was bribery, clean and simple, but it was old news, and the proof was circumstantial. They couldn't go public with it. It would be dismissed as a conspiracy theory. "We don't use it to attack," Alara said, her mind seeing the next step. "We use it as a probe." They decided to leak an anonymous tip, not to the press, but to a rival real estate developer, a notoriously aggressive firm that had lost the bid for a new project to Thorne just last month. The tip was simple, a suggestion to look into the zoning approval process for Thorne's upcoming luxury condo development in Brooklyn, and a hint that certain city officials were amenable to influence. The effect was immediate. The rival developer, smelling blood in the water, filed a legal challenge, demanding a review of the zoning permits. The challenge delayed Thorne's project, costing him millions in carrying costs and investor anxiety. It was a pinprick, but it was their first victory. Thorne would not know where the attack came from. He would see a greedy rival, not the ghost of Alara Vance, but he would feel it. He would know that an unseen force was beginning to push back. Their next move was more subtle, using her deep knowledge of architectural planning and city building codes. Alara analyzed the blueprints for Thorne's most anticipated project, the Phoenix Center, a state-of-the-art medical research facility. Publicly, it was his magnum opus, a gift to the city. Alara found a flaw. It wasn't a structural flaw, but a logistical one, buried deep in the HVAC and plumbing schematics. A specific, rare type of copper piping was specified, a type produced by only one manufacturer in the world. Anya investigated the manufacturer. It was a small, struggling company in Germany. 2 years ago, it had been quietly acquired by a private equity fund, a fund controlled by Julian Thorne. He had created a supply chain bottleneck that only he could control, allowing him to build his own foundation for massively inflated material costs, effectively using charitable donations to enrich his private holdings. It was a brilliant, almost undetectable scheme. They now had leverage. This was not a pinprick. This was a dagger. But Alara knew it was not yet time to strike. This information was too valuable. It was their ace in the hole, the key to the final phase of her plan. As they worked, Leo's investigation into the past continued to yield strange, disconnected clues about the Sterling Thorne scandal of 1998. He found old newspaper clippings, archived court transcripts, and sealed witness depositions. "There's something about the timeline that doesn't add up," he said one night, staring at a board covered in dates and names. Alistair Thorne's suicide. It happened the day before. Your father was scheduled to give his most damning testimony. Everyone assumed he killed himself because he knew he was finished. But what if that's not the whole story? He had found a recurring motif in Alistair Thorne's final business dealings: obsessive, almost frantic attempts to acquire a specific, unremarkable piece of property. It was a small, defunct industrial warehouse on the Brooklyn waterfront, a property once owned by Alara's grandfather. Why would he care about that old place, Leo wondered aloud. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered that warehouse. Her father had sold it years before the scandal. A simple business transaction. She had never understood why he seemed so haunted by it. Anya, working in parallel, was trying to gain access to Julian Thorne's personal files, stored on a heavily encrypted private server. It was the heart of his digital fortress. After weeks of searching for a vulnerability, she found one, not in the code, but in the man. She discovered that, every year, on the anniversary of his father's death, Julian Thorne would log into a secure digital vault from his home computer. It was a moment of sentiment, of ritual, and a moment of potential weakness. The anniversary was 2 days away. "If I can get inside that vault," Anya said, her eyes bright with a hunter's intensity, "I can get inside his head." The office was quiet as the date of the anniversary arrived. Anya sat before her bank of monitors, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Leo paced restlessly. Alara stood perfectly still, watching the screens, her mind a vortex of calculations and possibilities. They were on the verge of something. They were about to drill into the foundation of Julian Thorne's life, and she had no idea what they would find. "He's logging in," Anya announced, her voice a tense whisper. "The ritual is starting. I have a window. It's small. I'm going in." Code scrolled across the screen in a blur of green and black, for 3 agonizing minutes. There was only the sound of Anya's breathing and the frantic clicking of her keys. And then, a single word from Anya in. She had bypassed the primary security. She was inside the digital vault. It was not a corporate archive. It was a personal one, a mausoleum of memory. There were scanned letters, family photographs, and a single, password-protected audio file labeled with a date the day before Alistair Thorne's death. "I can't break this encryption," Anya said, frustration edging her voice. "Not without a key." "Look at the photographs," Alara said, her intuition firing. "Look for something personal. A name. A place." Anya's fingers flew. Images flashed on the screen. A young Julian with his father on a sailboat. A family portrait in front of a grand estate. A faded, black and white photo of Alistair Thorne as a young man, standing with another man. Anya zoomed in. The other man was Alara's grandfather. "My God," Leo breathed. They knew each other. They were friends. Beneath the photo was a handwritten inscription. "To my friend and partner, Robert Vance Sr. May our legacy last forever. Alistair, 1965. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a sickening thud. This was never just about business. Anya scanned another photo. A candid shot of Julian as a boy, sitting on his father's lap. In the background, on Alistair's desk, was a small framed object, a child's drawing of a boat. Underneath it, a single word was scrawled in crayon: Invictus. "That's the password," Alara said instantly. "Try it." Anya typed the word. The audio file unlocked. She clicked play. The voice that filled the room was not the polished, confident baritone of Julian Thorne. It was the strained, desperate voice of his father, Alistair, recorded over 30 years ago. It was his final confession, a message left for his son. Julian. The voice crackled, full of static and despair. By the time you hear this, I will be gone. They will tell you I was a criminal, a fraud. They will tell you Robert Vance, your friend Alara's father, was a hero who exposed me. It's a lie. Son. All of it. The voice broke with a sob. Robert didn't expose me. He betrayed me. We built everything together. His father and I, we were partners. That warehouse, the one on the waterfront, it was our beginning, our pact. But he was weak. When the investigators started asking questions, Robert made a deal. He agreed to testify against me, to save himself and his own reputation. He fed them the documents they needed to ruin me. He was their star witness. He chose his family's good name over our friendship, over my life. The story the world knew was a lie. Ilara's father had not been a reluctant, compelled witness. He had been a co-conspirator who, facing ruin, had turned on his partner to save himself. He had built his family's honorable legacy on the wreckage of the Thorne family. He destroyed us. Julian. Alistair's voice rasped, a ghost's final command. He took everything from us, our name, our future. I want you to promise me. You will never forget. You will rebuild what we lost, and you will make them pay. You will take back everything they built on our ashes. You will balance the scales. For me. The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Alara felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The entire narrative of her life, the bedrock of her identity, was a lie. Her father was not a hero. He was a man who had made a terrible choice. A choice that had led to another man's suicide and orphaned his son. And Julian. Julian was not a greedy corporate raider. He was a son fulfilling his father's dying wish. His campaign against her was not about business. It was biblical. An eye for an eye. A legacy for a legacy. He was seeking a terrible, tragic, and, in his own mind, perfectly balanced form of justice. The conflict was no longer about saving her company. It was about confronting a devastating truth that had poisoned both their families for a generation. Julian Thorne was not just her enemy. He was a mirror, reflecting a dark and inherited trauma that was as much a part of her foundation as it was of his. And he was coming to collect a debt she never knew she owed. The revelation of her father's betrayal settled into Alara's soul like a shard of ice. For a day, she was paralyzed by it. The moral architecture of her world collapsing into ruin. The righteous anger that had fueled her was gone, replaced by a hollow, complex grief. She was not the victim of a monster. She was the heir to a terrible debt. But as she stared at the whiteboard, at the intricate web of deceit they had uncovered, the bribery, the self-dealing, the systematic corruption Julian Thorne had used to rebuild his empire, a new, colder resolve took shape. Her father's sin did not absolve Julian of his own. Julian had not sought justice. He had perpetuated a cycle of destruction, using his father's tragedy as a license to become a monster far more powerful and corrupt than Alistair Thorne had ever been. He had used a personal vendetta to justify a reign of corporate terror. The scales were not balanced. They were shattered. She now understood his strategy. He wasn't just trying to acquire her company. He was trying to reenact his father's ruin upon her, to make her feel the same public shame, the same helpless fall from grace. Her victory could not be simply to survive. She had to seize control of the narrative and expose the truth, all of it. Just as her resolve hardened, Julian struck again, this time with overwhelming and devastating force. He must have sensed the net closing around him, felt the subtle resistance from the legal challenge and the whispers of his compromised project. His retaliation was not a scalpel. It was a sledgehammer. It began with a series of official-looking emails. The first was from the State Licensing Board for Architects. An anonymous complaint, they said, had been filed against her, alleging professional misconduct and ethical violations related to the Westfield project. Her license was suspended, pending a full investigation, effective immediately. Without her license, she was professionally dead. She couldn't sign off on blueprints, attend site meetings, or legally call herself an architect. Minutes later, a second email arrived. It was from her bank. A federal court had issued a temporary injunction, freezing all personal and business assets of Alara Vance and Vance Atelier, pending an investigation into the financial irregularities alleged in the licensing complaint. She was cut off. The war chest she had so carefully assembled was gone. Her company's payroll accounts were frozen. She couldn't pay her employees. She couldn't pay Leo or Anya. She couldn't even buy groceries. With 2 emails, Julian Thorne had rendered her powerless, a ghost in her own life. The final blow was the most personal and the most cruel. That evening, the news broke. Leo Sterling, the disgraced journalist, had been arrested. The charges were for cyberstalking and harassment. The complainant was a junior employee at the Thorne Foundation, one of the people Anya had cultivated online to map their network. The evidence was a file of selectively edited, out-of-context emails and chat logs, planted on Leo's laptop by a piece of malware that Anya later identified as Thorne's signature work. It was a perfect frame job. Leo, who had already lost his reputation once, was now facing prison time. Anya called Alara, her voice tight with panic. They got him. Alara. They got Leo. The trail leads back to us. The malware they used. It has a tracker. They know they're being watched. We have to shut everything down. We have to run. This was it. Her lowest point. Her assets were frozen. Her career was in ruins. Her ally was in jail. And her last remaining team member was about to flee. She was alone in the dark, with the full weight of Julian Thorne's empire bearing down on her. The temptation to give up, to accept the crushing defeat, was immense. Arthur's words echoed in her mind. You can't fight a god. She sat in the silent, darkened office, the whiteboards covered in their useless battle plans. She thought of her father, not as the hero she had worshipped, but as a flawed man who had made a choice born of fear. He had chosen survival over loyalty, and in doing so, had unleashed this generational curse. She thought of Julian, a boy poisoned by his father's final words, who had spent his life building a monument to revenge. She would not make her father's choice. She would not retreat, but to continue the fight. She had to do something she had never done before. She had to cross a moral line. She had to use the information they had, not just as leverage, but as a weapon. And she had to be willing to accept the collateral damage. She looked at the file on her computer, the one containing the proof of Thorne's scheme with the German copper pipe manufacturer. Exposing it would not only ruin Thorne, it would also bankrupt the small German company, throwing hundreds of innocent people out of work. It would crater the stock of the hospital project's suppliers and partners, hurting investors who had nothing to do with Thorne's crimes. It was a nuclear option. Anya, Alara said into the phone, her voice calm and resolute. Don't run. I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to package everything we have on the Phoenix Center's supply chain. The inflated invoices, the shell company that owns the manufacturer, all of it. And I need you to send it to every major news outlet, every federal regulator, and every single investor in that project. We're going to burn it all to the ground. There was a pause on the other end. "Alara," Anya said slowly. "People will get hurt. People who don't deserve it." "I know," Ilara replied, the words tasting like ash. "War is not without its casualties. He has left me no other choice. He wants to see my world burn. Fine. We'll light the match together." It was a morally ambiguous choice, born of desperation and a newfound understanding of the brutal world she was fighting in. To defeat a man who believed the ends justified the means, she had to be willing to do the same. She was no longer just defending her legacy. She was embracing the darkness to fight the monster who thrived in it. The city buzzed with anticipation. Tonight was the grand unveiling of Thorn Tower, the new billion-dollar global headquarters of the Thorn Foundation. It was more than a building. It was Julian Thorn's legacy, cast in steel and glass. A monument to his power and his supposed benevolence. The mayor, the governor, and a constellation of corporate and cultural titans were gathered for a televised press conference and gala in the tower's soaring, cathedral-like atrium. This was to be Julian's coronation, the final, triumphant act of a man who had remade his family's name. From a nondescript van parked 2 blocks away, Ilara, Anya, and a newly bailed-out Leo Sterling watched the proceedings on a bank of monitors. Leo's arrest had been a nightmare, but Ilara's nuclear option had worked. The exposé on the Phoenix Center corruption had exploded like a firebomb. Federal investigators had raided the Thorn Foundation, the German manufacturer, and a dozen affiliated companies. The scandal was immense, a vortex of outrage that had forced the district attorney to drop the flimsy charges against Leo in the face of a much larger crime. The move had cost Ilara dearly in moral clarity, but it had bought her this one final chance to finish the fight. Julian Thorn, however, was a master of narrative. Despite the swirling scandal, he had refused to cancel the gala. Instead, he had framed the investigation as a baseless attack by jealous rivals, a test of his resolve. Tonight's speech was to be his defiant response, a demonstration that he was untouchable. "He's a cornered animal," Leo whispered, his voice still hoarse. "He's at his most dangerous." "The foundation of his building is corrupt," Ilara said, her gaze fixed on the monitor, showing Julian glad-handing politicians. "Tonight, we prove it." Anya's fingers danced across her keyboard. "I'm in their network. The presentation for his speech is loaded on the main server. I can swap it out whenever you give the word. Are you sure about this?" "Ilara. The secondary file." Ilara nodded, her face set. "He built his life on a half-truth. We're ending it with the whole truth. All of it." Inside the atrium, Julian Thorn stepped to the podium, basking in the warm glow of the stage lights and the adoring applause of the city's elite. The massive screens behind him displayed the Thorn Foundation logo, a symbol of hope and charity. "Thank you," he began, his voice radiating calm strength. "In recent days, my work, my integrity, has been called into question. Malicious lies have been spread. But I stand before you tonight in this tower, a testament to our shared commitment to progress, to say that we will not be deterred by the forces of envy and destruction." In the van, Ilara gave a quiet nod. "Now, Anya." On the screens behind Julian, the Thorn logo flickered and dissolved. It was replaced by a high-resolution scan of a bank statement from the Shell Corporation in Delaware, with a payment to the corrupt zoning commissioner circled in red. A collective gasp went through the audience. Julian's smile froze on his face. He faltered for a second, turning to look at the screen, his composure cracking for the first time. "A technical glitch, it seems," he said, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The screen changed again, now displaying the damning schematics for the Phoenix Center, showing the supply chain fraud in undeniable detail. Next came the inflated invoices, the proof of embezzlement, the web of shell companies. Anya had turned his presentation into a meticulously documented indictment of his crimes. The audience was in an uproar. Phones were out, recording. News alerts began to flash across the city. Julian stood at the podium, speechless, his face ashen. His empire was crumbling around him in real time, broadcast live to the world. "And now for the foundation," Ilara whispered in the van. The final piece of evidence appeared on the screen. It was not a document. It was a video file. The audio began to play, and a familiar voice filled the atrium, the voice of Arthur Graves, Ilara's mentor. "Julian, the girl is relentless," Arthur's voice said, the recording clear and sharp. "She's uncovered the zoning issue. You must be more careful. As we agreed, my seat on the new acquisitions board is contingent on my ability to provide you with accurate intelligence on her strategy." The camera in the atrium panned to Arthur Graves, sitting in the front row. His face was a mask of pure horror and disbelief. The mentor, the man who had told her to give up, had been the mole all along. He had been feeding Julian information in exchange for power, a final, pathetic grasp at relevance. The crowd's murmurs turned to shouts of outrage. This was a betrayal they all understood, a sin against the city's unspoken code of loyalty. Ilara had a final choice to make. She had the recording of her father's confession, the audio file that revealed the original sin that had started it all. She could play it, expose her own family's shame to contextualize Julian's rage, to show the world the full, tragic picture. But as she looked at Julian Thorne's broken figure on the screen, she saw not a monster, but a man trapped in his father's past. Exposing her own father would not be justice. It would be perpetuating the cycle of shame. She had to break it. "That's enough, Anya," she said. "Cut the feed." The screens went black, but the damage was done. The truth, or at least the part of it that mattered tonight, was out. Julian Thorne, the philanthropist saint, was a fraud, a criminal, and a manipulator. Her final moral choice had been made. She had been given the chance to expose another's life, Arthur's, to achieve her goal. She had taken it. She had chosen complete, brutal truth over mercy, proving to herself that justice, once set in motion, had to be absolute. She had become as ruthless as her enemy. But unlike him, her war was over. The aftermath was swift and total. As chaos erupted in the atrium of Thorne Tower, flashing blue and red lights painted the glass walls from the outside. Federal agents, who had clearly been waiting for a signal, streamed into the building, their movements calm and practiced amidst the panic. They moved past the stunned crowd of billionaires and politicians and made a direct line for the stage. Julian Thorne did not run. He simply stood at the podium, a statue carved from defeat. As the agents surrounded him, his world had been deconstructed in the space of 5 minutes. His legacy reduced to a matter for the U.S. Attorney's Office. The investors, partners, and politicians who had eagerly shaken his hand an hour earlier now scrambled for the exits, their faces a mixture of fear and disgust, their public relations teams already drafting statements of condemnation. Ilara, Leo, and Anya watched it all on the monitors in the van. There was no elation, no triumphant cheer, just the quiet, heavy feeling of a war concluded. "It's over," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. He was a free man, his name cleared, his tormentor vanquished. "It's balanced," Ilara corrected softly. She stepped out of the van and walked toward the tower. the cold night air sharp against her face. She moved through the periphery of the chaos, an anonymous figure in the crowd of reporters and onlookers. She saw Arthur Graves being escorted out by his own lawyers, his face a gray mask of shame, a man whose legacy had been incinerated by a moment of recorded weakness. She entered the now emptying atrium, in the center of the vast marble floor. Julian stood with two federal agents, waiting to be led away. His eyes scanned the room and found hers. There was a moment of silent acknowledgement between them, two architects of ruin standing in the wreckage they had co-created. An agent gently took his arm, but Julian raised a hand, asking for a moment. He walked toward her, his steps heavy. The agents kept a respectful distance. He stopped a few feet from her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, profound exhaustion. "My father's recording," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "You found it. Why didn't you play it? Why didn't you tell them the whole story?" "Because his story ends with you, Julian," Ilara replied, her voice even, without a trace of gloating. "And my father's story ends with me. What they did does not define us. What we did, that is our legacy." He looked around the magnificent atrium, at the monument he had built to his own hatred. "I spent my entire life trying to honor him, to get back what we lost." He looked back at her, his eyes filled with a dawning, tragic understanding. Was it worth it? Ilara thought of the collateral damage, of the lives upended, of the moral compromises she had been forced to make. She thought of the poison that had seeped through 2 generations. "Justice isn't about worth," she said. "It's about balance." He nodded slowly, a man finally accepting the weight of his own creation. The agents stepped forward. And, this time, Julian Thorne went with them, leaving Ilara Vance alone in the heart of his fallen empire. 6 months later, Ilara stood before the same skyscraper, but it was no longer called Thorne Tower. The gleaming letters had been removed, leaving faint outlines like scars on the facade. The building, a toxic asset of a bankrupt foundation, had been acquired by a consortium she had quietly formed, comprised of ethical investors and community land trusts. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in the practical attire of a working architect. Her license had been reinstated after a review board concluded the complaint against her was malicious and unfounded. Vance Atelier was rebuilding, smaller and more focused than before, its reputation for integrity now forged in fire. Today was a new unveiling. A small crowd had gathered community leaders, former employees she had managed to rehire, and a few trusted journalists. Leo was there, reporting the story for a major online publication where he was now a senior editor. Anya was there too, having founded a successful cybersecurity firm dedicated to protecting nonprofits and activists from the kinds of attacks she had once perpetrated. Ilara stepped to a simple lectern. "A building is a statement," she began, her voice clear and strong. For a time, this building was a statement of power, of ego, and of a deep, hidden pain. Today, we offer a new statement. She gestured to the empty space where the old name had been. A canvas covering was pulled away, revealing new, elegant lettering, the Vance Thorne Center for Ethical Innovation. A murmur went through the crowd. To include the name of the man whose crimes had been exposed within these very walls was a shocking, audacious act. This center will not be a monument to one person, but a resource for many. Ilara explained, it will house a foundation providing legal and financial aid to families and small businesses destroyed by corporate corruption. It will be an incubator for architects, engineers, and city planners committed to building with conscience. It is named for two fathers, Robert Vance and Alistair Thorne, not to celebrate them, but to remember them. To remember that a single choice, born of fear or of vengeance, can echo for generations. This building will stand as a promise that we can break that cycle. We can choose to build, not just to win. It was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of profound, radical redemption. She was not just restoring her own legacy. She was redeeming the one Julian had sought to build through hatred, transforming it into something that could heal rather than harm. Later that day, back in her office, a letter arrived by courier. It was from a federal correctional facility. The handwriting was the elegant, disciplined script of Arthur Graves. She opened it. Alara. It began. There are no words to properly express the depth of my shame, nor any apology that could undo my betrayal. I was a weak man, afraid of becoming irrelevant. I watched you face down an empire with a courage I have never known. You did not just defeat Julian Thorne. You showed him, and me, a better way to build. You are the architect of not just buildings, but of a more just world. Thank you. Alara folded the letter. She felt no triumph, no lingering anger, only a sense of quiet, hard-won peace. She walked to her window and looked out at the city skyline, among the towers of commerce and power. The newly renamed Vance Thorne Center stood, no longer a symbol of revenge, but of rebirth. The scales were balanced.